Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to make a start now. I know people are still joining, but we've got a bit of intro, a bit of housekeeping. So we'll get started so we can move on to the content relatively quickly. First of all, I'm Amjad from Impact Lebanon. So for those of you who don't know, Impact Lebanon is an initiative hub aimed at promoting active citizenship through collaboration between the diaspora and local groups and entities to drive change in Lebanon. We're a platform that allows active members and those who wish to become active to bring their ideas and tap into community and resources to make them happen. Our strength is basically connecting people who share similar aims and complement each other into successful initiatives. Some of our key initiatives so far are the Environment Academy, the Kene, the mentorship program, a series of debates, a series of awareness seminars, and fundraising as well. We're basically a grassroots initiative with a bottom-up organization to be driven by members. So this event is a live conversation on the global revolutions with the Iraqi, Lebanese, and Chilean perspective. Unfortunately, our Chilean panelist had to drop out last minute because of a family issue. So we'll be focusing on Iraq and Lebanon. This event was supposed to be a live event in person in March, and we've sort of adapted it for the post-COVID world. And it's part of our Thawra Pulse initiative. So just to give you a bit of context on this event. So the year 2019 has been a year of a lot of changes, a lot of social revolts, uprisings, and revolutions. Not limited to, but including Hong Kong, that started in June 2019, Chile, Iraq, and Lebanon in October. We've all gone through lots of ups and downs, from euphoria to extreme anxiety. And it is a kind of a special feeling to realize that we're basically not alone in this fight, and that a lot of us are going through it around the world, and that we're all fighting the same fight. So this conversation and exchange will allow us to sort of build a stronger community and to learn from each other. Why did we choose Lebanon, Iraq, and Chile? These are a sample of the global countries that are going through social movements, and in no way is a exclusive list. So we obviously recognize and stand in solidarity with all the other people who are going through a similar phase. So the format of this discussion will be sort of open and free-flowing discussion between our activist guests to hear their perspectives. The way it will happen is that we will have a section of sort of moderated discussion for maybe an hour or so around the topics that we've sort of put together with our guests. And then after that, we'll open it up to Q&A. I'm sure a lot of you have things to ask and a lot of interest in this topic. So I'll remind you later, but the Q&A basically will be a mix of questions that you can type into the Q&A box on Zoom, and a mixture of that and raising your hand during the topic, during the discussion, and we can pick out people from the audience. So if you've got any questions that come up during the first section, you can write them in the Q&A, and they'll be recorded for us to pick up later. And if you see a question that is basically similar to what you want to ask, you might want to upvote it instead of asking it twice. That way it will go up and have more chance of being answered if we run out of time, unfortunately. And I think that is it. And I'll pass the mic to Ilya, who will introduce the panelists and kickstart the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. There's 62 of you for now. It's very exciting. So I'm really happy to have Lilav and Chloe left. So I'm going with Chloe. Oh, can you hear me, right?
The connection is a bit cutty, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Chloe Kattar is a final year PhD student in history at the University of Cambridge in the UK. She's working on an intellectual history of the Lebanese Civil War. Thank you. And October, she's been writing about Instagram account at leb.historian. Follow her. Welcome, Chloe. And Lilav Ihsan is a SOAS graduate student studying gender studies with special reference to the Middle East. So her research is focusing on transnational and intersectional feminist movements. And she's also researching gender norms in Iraq and the effects of the revolution. She's been involved in the Iraqi youth social and gender awareness movement in post-conflict from a gender perspective, professionally and a non-volunteering basis. That's really awesome and needed. Hi, Lilav. Do you guys want to add anything about yourself and give us a little like intro about the revolution, a little 3-minute intro? Chloe, you can start because I started with you.
You're muted, Chloe.
I'm sorry, me and so yeah, I'm just going to give just some things that we all know about the Lebanese protests. So what we call the 2019-2020 Lebanese protest, also known as the October Revolution, also known as the Thawra, are a series of protests that kicked off on October 17, 2019, and took place all over Lebanon. It is wrongfully said that it was triggered by a $6 tax on WhatsApp. This was only one of the many taxes that the government planned on implementing in a bid to grapple with what was then an already expanding economic crisis due to the shortage of dollars. And we often forget that one of the main catalysts of the uprising was the unprecedented wildfires that swept through the country on October 14th, only 3 days before people took it to the streets. And the mismanagement of the fires shone a brighter light on the overall dysfunction of the state, which in turn made the frustration against the political elite one of the key drivers of the protests. Only a combination of those severe economic, political, and ecological downfalls can explain the sudden eruption of protests. So from there, people kept taking it to the streets, unleashing a surge of discontent that was boiling already and been simmering in Lebanon for years. I like to see it in two phases, but of course this is up and subject to change and criticism. The first phase to me is like the Malyouniye phase. So the phase that took place between October and December broadly, and was the most intense phase of protests, reaching 1 million people in the streets in the first week, but with a sustained protesting activity with road blockades, barricades, intense clashes with police and other social groups, sometimes bordering on urban warfare. The second phase resumed after the Christmas holiday, when protests returned on January 14th, but with less intensity, entering a cycle of ons and offs with specific themes, such as Usbu' al-Ghadab, for instance, and became more focused protests targeting specific institution or specific causes. There's a broad range of demands across the Thawra. The main political ones are, of course, the fight against corruption, the end of the sectarian system, and the replacement of the old political elites. On the economic level, it is, of course, the recovery of stolen funds, better living condition, better access to public service such as electricity and so on. And on a social level, It has been the fight for more recognition and for more basic human rights for citizen and non-citizen at the margins of society. And I'm sure we will discuss this part more like in the later parts. So when it all began, I wasn't in Lebanon. I never witnessed any of this live. I followed everything online, and it inspired me so much that I decided to write on it on a daily basis on my Instagram page.
Awesome. Thanks, Chloe.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? The revolution started within October 2019, mainly in Baghdad, Tahrir Square. But I think there's a tiny bit of history that should be explained that many people usually ignore. I mean, it's usually ignored. The rise of the revolution actually started in 2011 with the slogan "الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام," so to reform the regime. Again in 2015, and it was mainly about electricity and other basic assessments that the people lacked. In 2018, again in Basra, with several complaints about lack of employment and also lack of services, especially water and electricity. Within the 2019 timeline, we actually happened to focus more on the youth and the very high rate of unemployment, which has reached up to 40%. We're also seeing how within the post 2003 phase, all the adaptation of the neoliberal policies, the complete privatization of many sectors, the public sectors no longer offering jobs, which goes against the former policies of how people used to be employed back in the day. And most importantly, the oil field being completely privatized, with an employment of only 1% of the workforce being national Iraqis. What triggered the people to go and take down the street on October 1st was the fact that graduates were organizing sit-ins in front of the ministries. And after 3 months of constant organizing and protesting, the ministries opened water cannons on those students. Most of them were PhD students and PhD graduates. And I think that really sparked a very big aha moment for the nation in general, because if those were the higher degree holders, what about the rest of the people who were still also lacking employment? The government attacked multiple homes and shops within the working class areas, and those were properties that were bought. They were bought, but not straight from the government, but rather from the militias taking place and ruling those areas. The protest started in Tahrir Square with the slogan "Nazil akhud haqqi." So I'm going down to take my rights, basically. And the government response was immediately severely violent. Tear gas, water cannons, immediate cut off internet all over the country. And I think that triggered a lot, and that really pushed people to take down the streets even more. Multiple militia groups attacked people and hospitals all over the country as well. And there were many different tactics for that violence and how it leashed in further development of the revolution.
Thank you. Thanks for this. Yeah, there's like so much to talk about in terms of the ways in which people have like taken on the streets, and the different ways in which people have chosen or were forced to express themselves during all these months on the streets. So we've seen like the streets are like an area for expression, from arts to chants and slogan. and various forms of debates, and all the new things that were created on the streets, as well as all the violence that we've seen. So do you guys want to expand a little bit on all the ways that we've seen people expressing themselves and how maybe it changed through time as well? I mean, any of you can start. I know, Chloe, you can go if you want. You're muted yourself. So.
I mean, I think one of the things that happened, and I mean, this is something that, I mean, happens all around the world when there are protests, is the fact that we reclaim our public spaces, right? So in Lebanon, we've seen this phenomenon taking some, I think, a new level of inventivity. So we kind of created new public spaces. So recently I spoke about the bridge, the ring bridge in Beirut being this example of new hybrid public spaces that was born out of the Thawra. Because I mean, for the ones who've never been to Beirut, the ring bridge is this random urban crossroads that links two parts of Beirut. It's just a random bridge, and we always get stuck there because of heavy traffic jam. It's really a non-space, literally. And since the Thawra began, people took it to the bridge, and it became a symbolic thing to occupy the bridge as a form of protest. And since October 17th, the bridge, the ring, became one of our iconic Thawra locations. And I think this is symbolic in two ways, because the bridge, its location coincides with the old demarcation line of the war, the green line that separated east of Beirut and west of Beirut. So there are this location is heavy with memories about the war, but it also bears another legacy, which is Hariri's, so one of our ex-prime ministers, neoliberal reconstruction of Lebanon in the post-war era. Where they started this huge wave of construction to make Beirut the new modern city they wanted to be. And the bridge was aggrandized and modernized in a bit to make the roads, the network of roads around Beirut more modern. So I think the ring bridge bears this double legacy of the war of 1975, but also of the 90s, and the aggressive capitalist economy that prevailed in the last 3 decades, and that we are still kind of, and which impact us until today. So revolting and occupying the ring bridge is kind of going against this double legacy. And what was interesting about the ring bridge also is that it was born out of the mix of online and physical effervescence around the space. So it could only be activated through calls to protest that were sent online and through the live broadcast of the protest on the ring bridge. So I don't think the ring bridge would have been a space, an important space, without the online aspect. And I think this is maybe another innovative ways in which our revolutions now are digital too, and they shape our public spaces, kind of.
Yeah,
it's amazing the amount of intersectionalities and points of resemblance between Lebanon and Iraq, especially when it comes to the revolution. The reclaiming the public spaces back was one of probably the most empowering phases that Iraq has experienced ever since 2003. This itself is the biggest revolution in the history of the country. But at the same time, the fact that one of the places that were reclaimed were, for example, Al-Mat'am al-Turki, which is one of the biggest buildings in the area, and it has been used by governmental forces and by militia forces throughout the history of the of the chain of those revolutions, as a targeting place to target and to shoot against the protesters. The fact that that place was under the full control of the protesters for most of the revolution, like most of the period of the revolution, and the fact that it was actually not just a place for the people to organize, but also to settle down in and to create creative spaces to debate and to read, to do political readings and to screen movies and to teach each other. And the other parts of the green zone that we as as working class citizens, we did not actually get to see ever since 2003, because it belongs to the green zone, which is, for those people who have never visited Baghdad before or recently, it's basically the governmental / the international working place area. And those were spaces that, even after the alignments and and the limitations for people to access certain parts of it, many of those public spaces we did not see in years, in 2 decades. So that as well was extremely important. One of the other things of how we actually managed to show reclaiming back public spaces was the very big role of women who led the revolution, and how taking back on the control over the streets, especially when it comes to certain spaces where women are not necessarily always, it's not a generalized space where women can easily access. That was also a very strong form of revolting and of claiming back authority over spaces. While the internet cut was very, very severe, especially at the first 2 to 3 weeks, and as the violence against the protesters increased, virtual spaces turned to be extremely as useful, if not even more in charge and more in lead of how things were facilitated. And then, from there, from the whole entire occupation and sitting down and organizing, to actually staying in those places and turning the Tahrir Square, turning all those other spaces into creative spaces for debate and for everyone to just sit down and talk and, and just learn more about each other.
I think I remember in the early days of the Thawra, so maybe in October, November, we used to share a lot of pictures from Baghdad's Tahrir Square, and I think we were in awe with how it looks like. Many of us never went to Iraq, and we've even as Middle Eastern, we've always seen images of destruction, right? And this is how we associate with. But what we saw was this really alternative scene in Baghdad, like these colors, those paintings on the wall, what people did with those old buildings. And I remember, like, because this was the time where we were really keen on having this solidarity between the two protests, and we were always resharing stuff. And I think something very similar happened in our public spaces, not only the Ring is this very specific a product of online and physical kind of effervescence. But there are, as you said, other spaces like the squares, our martyr squares, which I guess is the equivalent of Baghdad's Tahrir Square, which is supposedly designed to welcome pedestrians and people. But in the post-war era, it was this kind of non-space that nobody used, because the whole downtown was privatized and designed to welcome only a specific class of the population. So when the protests start, all of this zone around downtown was occupied and reclaimed. We even took the egg, this like completely abandoned architectural jewel that nobody used for decades, and we made it kind of another iconic symbol of the Thawra. And I think this the fact that we reclaimed those old buildings with a lot of history, but that were like just mainly abandoned, is a very nice kind of common thing between the Iraqi and Lebanese protests and how they reclaim their cities.
Exactly. And you know, we also had like the slogans من بغداد لبيروت وحدة ثورة واحدة ما بتموت, and few other ones because they were really creative. And you know, what's so interesting about the street art and how it started, it was basically to take over and to reclaim those old architectural buildings that were completely abandoned by the government, but it was also limited in terms of access, and you know, everyday working class could never access it. And you know, from the repainting to the turning it into those creative spaces, into encapsulating the art and the creativity of the revolution, and try to keep it on those walls, and just, you know, to turn those spaces into something that really belongs to us, and to take it back, was probably one of the most empowering things, and that led to then work on other you know, other street arts all around the city.
Definitely, I think Thawra art or revolutionary art is one of those big topics that we can't escape when we talk about the new ways or the new channels we found to express ourselves. I'm just thinking of all the graffitis that, the new graffitis that were added to the urban landscape. I mean, the graffitis in Beirut, they've always been a thing. We have really very famous pieces all around the city. We have a very nice Fayrouz one in Jemmaize and in Gadr Sabah or Kulsum. We have those icons and really great graffiti artists who've always like added nice pieces to the city, and the Thawra was no exception. So I think the bridge, for instance, was this other space that was really tagged with new graffitis. But I think, I don't know if you want to add something, Lilav, on graffitis. I would like to talk more about digital art, because this is something that nobody talks about usually, and we always focus on other kinds of visual arts.
No, go ahead. You're absolutely right. There was just a lot of digital art, especially from those who could not access, you know, get to Baghdad. And we saw a lot of support from the diaspora community, especially the younger, you know, the younger generations on multiple aspects. So I would really, really love to talk about that.
So I think, I mean, to me, how I like to see it, I think that the Thawra created a completely new artistic movement. I think this is something up to debate, of course, but the amount of Thawra art that was generated after October 17, I think allows us to say that it created an artistic movement by itself, an artistic movement that is extremely varied in all the kinds and genres it used. But what I was struck by more, because my experience of Thawra was only like a digital one, I was struck by the digital art. So I think digital art is a broad field, but normally, I mean, we could define it as a practice that uses digital technology as part of the creative process. It could be really different things, and I never knew about it. I discovered it through the Thawra. And I think that's the direct consequence of the fact that the revolution itself was part digital. The call to actions, the meeting points, the slogans, the poster, the discussions were happening on social media platforms. So it was quite natural that the Thawra related art also appeared on social media. So, I mean, in the Lebanese case, I think art and design gave the revolutions its icon, its most known and recognizable icons, such as the Alayhum, digital art. You know, this woman who's kicking the guard in the, and then we turned it into a digital art that now everyone associates with the Lebanese revolution. So I think Lebanese artists and designers and illustrators, they played a key role in expressing the variety of emotions and beliefs that we had. Because we can write lots of things, but there's nothing that matches the power of an image or of a symbol. So one example of this new kind of art that I'd like to talk about is featured on one of my favorite Instagram pages about the Thawra, and it's called The Art of Thawra, which is a kind of the virtual museum of the Lebanese revolution. And I'm quoting its founder, Paula, who is a Lebanese curator and creative director, who took the initiative to gather the pieces and share them first on her own personal Instagram page. But then the content grew so exponentially that it created kind of a domino effect as more and more artists, designer, illustrator wanted to produce specific Thawra art. And so she then decided to give them a specific platform of their own where they could shine and express themselves freely and connect with each other. And so this is how this Instagram page, I think one of the most popular Thawra page, was born on October 21st, I think, 21 October 2019. And it displays until now the wide range of creative twists, themes and ideas of these artists who use a wide spectrum of artistic mediums, from digital Instagram filters to GIFs, to animation, to graffitis, to all on canvas. So it's really a mix of different artistic methods and means, and it's just super beautiful. And it was an explosion of digital art all over my feed. And 95% of this content is generated in Lebanon, and 5% only is generated by expats, by Lebanese artists based abroad. I think to me this was kind of a fresh thing compared to graffitis, because we already had a huge graffiti scene in Beirut.
That's super interesting, and I'm seeing the Art of Thawra page now on display, and it's beautiful. I think when it comes to Iraqi context, we were extremely affected by the street art, because it was one of the very first time it's visibly present, at least with such concentration and with such quality all around the city. Within like a couple of weeks, we saw young people on entrepreneurship businesses turn those symbols into stickers and magnets and postcards and t-shirts. And I finally got my t-shirt like 3 months after, but it's extremely amazing how we were highly affected positively, and how this patriotic scene manifested into us wanting to highly engage with these materials and with those with those kind of emotions on everyday basis, that it's now basically a part of us. All over, whether it was Baghdad, whether it was Basra, whether it was Nasriya, whether it was the student-led demonstrations all over the country, there was just a lot of creativity and also a lot of photography that was extremely, noticeable. And I think it has even changed the way we consume media now, because we're now just a lot more into virtual spaces, and we're prioritizing and essentializing the voices of those who create the change over superior capitalistic news agencies. So it's how art has really influenced people to start questioning and to start engaging with emotions that they have unnecessarily abandoned due to conflict and due to those series of chains of of wars that they have went through. And it was extremely eye-opening how art can actually revolve something within you and just increase that emotion.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chloe. I think that's so amazing, and I think, as you said, like also the fact that art kind of like memorizes events that happen, so that even the things that it doesn't allow us to like forget or get overwhelmed. Like this picture of the girl kicking, like we would have easily forgotten about it if it wasn't for the video, or, if we weren't there. So to see it, and then it just gives us strength, like later on when there's more difficulties, as well. And Chloe, you talked about like the social media platform as being like a huge player in propagating like information and things. And we talked last time about how it was also like a platform to talk about more like practical issues or raise more practical awareness as well, for issues around, well, today we decided to talk about feminist demands in the Thawra and in the revolution. So can you tell us a little bit about like the demands of women and what you've witnessed through social media? About this.
I think there's two things here. I think something that Lilav said about social media generating kind of new knowledge or just giving us a new perspective on things. And that's something that we've seen a lot in the Lebanese case, because over the months, we've started categorizing kind of the media outlets we use. So there's like the traditional media, which is biased and only like reflect a specific partisan opinion. And then we have our own platforms on social media that's been prioritizing an alternative point of view. And I think lots of people are now consuming news through those new channels. And I think this is on the long run is going to kind of reshape the media landscape in the Middle East. I think now if you want to attract a new kind of generation that's like more open-minded and has like more critical thinking, I think you can't ignore social media. You can only have a TV station. I think that kind of contradiction appeared, right? Because TV stations were not all the time reporting or broadcasting what was happening live, and we had to turn on our live options through Instagram and Facebook and social media to know what was happening. So yeah, I think those platforms were instrumental. And I mean, when it comes to women, I think in the revolution, in the Lebanese revolution, has been so wide and so important and so varied that it can't just be summarized in this debate. I'm sure that this is going to be the subject of a thesis sometime very soon, what a woman did in the Lebanese revolution, because it's a huge field. So whether there were simple protesters, community organizers, animators, songwriters, digital activists, artists, photographers, I think they did various things to keep the Thawra going, and they are still not given their full due, kind of. So this part of this discussion has been inspired by conversation I had with other women in the Thawra, and especially special mention goes to activist Dana H. Also, many of the pages on Instagram that are devoted to the Thawra are run by women. So Dalil Thawra, Masalan, which has been our directory for all events since day one, and which, I mean, I can't imagine the kind of work it represents, is run by a group of women only. So I think, yeah, there needs to be more highlight on this. But I think most importantly, I think we had this amazing slogan in Lebanon, which was Al Thawra Unsa. It's a very nice slogan, and it kind of corroborates and insists on this unparalleled contribution and labor of women in the revolution. But I think this kind of very vague slogan is also kind of a trap, because it doesn't reflect the wide spectrum of identities that Lebanese or non-Lebanese women, or the individuals who don't even identify as women, but were still part of the movement, what they did. So I think if we want to speak about women in the revolution, we can we should speak about the variety of women and the variety of messages that we're trying to convey. I don't know, Lilav, if you want to add something here or.
Yeah, so there's just so many, so many intersectionalities between those two revolutions that it's, I'm like, yeah, same. But when it comes to the feminist perspective, it really started with mainly photographers. It started with nursing, with nursing assistants and capacities. It started with helping with the tents, especially those that screen movies, cinema thora, or those that assist students with their studies, as most of the schools went on strike in solidarity with the protesters. Also, that beautiful presence and how it triggered very much many political seniors, like senior officials, and the way it was commented on, especially on Twitter, by those officials, and how it has led into that other wave of exactly specified feminist wave called Shadar Adar, which also happened more or less around the Women's Day, March 8th. I actually want to quote for an Iraqi academic who recently wrote about this, and about how quoting for Taif al-Khudairi, Iraqi women and girls played an integral part in the demonstration that gripped on Iraq ever since 2019, taking down the streets, calling for gender equality, as well as protesting against the broader social, political, and economic conditions which continue to enable and justify patriarchal violence within the country. And in so doing, they were subverting heteronormative roles based on domesticity and submission, and reasserting their presence within public spheres, drawing inspiration from and building on the long history of Iraqi women's rights movements. The fact that more or less there, we also started discussing things like CEDAW. We also started discussing, the personal law status, the personal status laws, and how, people started questioning, why are we here? And I think this was one of the most important, ways of critical thinking that the feminist revolution was able to tackle, to trigger the question why, which we have actually forgotten about for so long. Also recently today, I discovered an article by Maikali for an Iraqi activist, Musa Shadidi, about sexual diversity within the streets of the Iraqi revolution. And I'm going to link it for everyone later on. And it's actually very, very eye-opening to know that there was a massive queer scene. It was, not publicly spoken about, but the fact that it's present, and it was, it bespoke itself in those radical progressive spaces, and it has highlighted and intersected with the main cause of the revolution. And it's about how we exist and we're here, and those streets belong to us, and regardless, whoever it is up there is speaking or talking or threatening or demonizing or using those monstrification methodologies of neoliberal politics to tackle that aspect, that completely failed. And I think, very, very soon we will be seeing further figures and further stories from down the streets, especially for us who are far away. I think there was that one time where we still really could not, understand yet if that picture was photoshopped or not, but there were multiple pictures with the queer flag on top of one of the buildings that were occupied by the protesters. We also had multiple pictures, and I think they will also be linked in the article about, asexuals and the importance of talking about sexual diversity and sexual liberation within the space of the Thawra, which was actually spoken about for the first time publicly, at least within Baghdad.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the Lebanese case as well, intersectionality is kind of key. I think if we want to talk about the contribution of women and LGBTQ plus groups to the messages of the Thawra, I think what should be said first of all is that the same activists and the same community organizer that played a key role in the Thawra, they are fighting all kinds of oppression since before the Thawra, to be fair. Women, LGBTQ plus non-binary activists have been fighting for the same issues and on so many levels for years now, and not only for women's right or for mothers' right, but also for domestic workers' right, for transgender people right. They've been already working on this for a long time. So for instance, they were among the organizer of the very popular International Women's Days March in Beirut, but also they're the same people who organize a demonstration against the kafala system before even this topic becoming like kind of trendy as it is now. But the media never shed light on their activism. So when the Thawra erupted, these women were already organizers and facilitators, and they kind of put their experience at the service of protest. So we owe them a lot. We owe to their preparedness, but also to their fierceness. When we were on the street, and I think this is something that lots of people don't know, is that the most important contribution of the feminist movement was the production of Thawra chants and slogans. So the chants that we all cherish and that we all sing along, it was these women that wrote the rhymes and the lyrics to those chants, and I don't think there's enough awareness on this. So they came up with those famous rhymes. They took hold of the microphones during protests. They animated, they shouted, they empowered protesters with their own voices and charisma. And there's not much light shed on them. So and to be fair, as you said, I think these are they are the ones who brought into the Thawra discourse specific themes that are not usually what the majority wants to focus on. So for instance, in Lebanon, we all discuss sectarianism. Ta'ifi is like this keyword that everyone just like scream when they're in the street. It's the easy one, right? Because it's there. But we don't all talk about unsuriya, about racism. We don't all talk about transphobia or homophobia or kafala or sexual harassment. So these women, they're the one who brought these subjects to the core of the Thawra message. And without realizing, we were chanting after them, right? But we did because they were prepared to do so, and because they kind of did it, and they broke a kind of wall of fear in doing so, right? So and that came with a lot of debates, because some people want the Thawra to be only about political and economic demands, but it can't be only about this, and we can't segregate demands and wanting to implement deep changes without fighting all kinds of social issues. So I think you talked about the queer, the LGBTQ plus flag being waved in Iraq. And I think in Lebanon, it's the same. We had, I'm sure there was flag waved around, but we had tags about LGBTQ plus right, or masalan, this very like kind of nasty thing that we say about lute, and saying that lute manna msabbe, it's not an insult. And we had this all over the walls and stuff like this. And again, it is queer women and activists from the LGBTQ plus community in Lebanon who has kind of shone a light on this. So it's true that the Thawra kind of offered those new platforms where they and gave more exposure to these organizers, because they haven't, I mean, in recent years, they haven't gotten the respect and the exposure they deserved, but they did this. And I think maybe this is a link that we could add to the kind of follow-up email to this talk. There is a series of videos that was done by Human Rights Watch to document and bring into light some of those LGBTQ plus activists in the Thawra, and who talked about how they participated and how it felt to brave their inner fears and to create spaces for themselves in the protest, even if in the first week it wasn't that much a given. And we can see them sing the chants they came up, which we were singing without knowing that they created it. And I think not all of these activists identify as women. And so they were also talking about transgender rights in Lebanon and how the Thawra kind of made it a bit more acceptable now, but we still have a very long way before it becomes what it should be. And yeah, I think their names is, I think these activists are Lauren, Nidal, Rana, and Maya, and you can hear them talk in the video, and I think it's really good that they got some spotlight, and that we could see what they did.
Yeah. The Human Rights Watch video you mentioned went viral, and I think I mean, I'm not sure if it was screened within the Cinema Thawra tent, but I know it was screened by so many activists who were leading the Thawra space in Baghdad. A friend who's also a journalist just dropped a note here. For the sexual diversity in Iraq's uprising of October 2019, yes, there were a lot of LGBTQ plus people protesting, and some were killed, others injured, and they planned for not appearing publicly. And that comes right after the, I mean, you guys probably know about this, but Muqtada Sadr's Twitter account tweeted that, we're talking about a certain timeline when COVID-19 was just starting, and there was a very big hate speech towards the gay community by Muqtada Sadr through his Twitter account, and that has targeted a lot of hate speech and a lot of sexism and even more violence towards certain communities and certain people. There were so many Photoshop videos and even private events of organizing and activism within the queer community in Iraq that went viral without the consent of the people. And I think here we're seeing how politics really does intersect and how radical activism really dismantles that kind of political authority. Many people were affected, and many people were outed without their consent, and whether they were outed in person or whether they were outed within the kind of social activism and political activism that they choose to self-represent through. It's not okay, and it happened because of that cycle of violence continuing, and because of there was already a lot of accumulation of violence that has already happened before before that tweet. In general, I think we are seeing a lot of just like Chloe said, we're seeing a lot of development, and we're seeing a lot of critical thinking methods that people are adapting to, especially the younger generations. We're seeing a lot of capacity to accept the other, regardless of how and when, and the differences of the other. But definitely we still have an extremely long way to go. We still have an extremely long way to go when it comes to so many topics, from from the law, from the legal matters, from the societal point of view, from social existence.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, June is Pride Month. So, for instance, recently there was a small protest in Beirut, and someone just waved an LGBTQ plus flag. And there were comments from like normal people who are not partisan people, who are not fanatic people, who are just expressing an opinion and saying that we are for their causes, but this is not the time to wave this flag because we only need to wave one flag. So there's still, even in the new generation, a very weird understanding, or there's maybe not enough understanding of the necessity for intersectionality. That's the point, right? So they're still saying, no, that comes later, or and again, this is where I think we should give them the due to those queer activists who are and it's kind of at the risk of their own lives and mental health. They're kind of bringing those usually marginalized discourse to the mainstream discourse, and we are getting used to it slowly thanks to their labor, right? But I think that's something. I think about that you said about self-censorship. I think that's something that we saw with refugees in Lebanon. Wanting to be part of the revolution, but for numerous reasons not being able to as they wanted to. So I think we discussed this as part of the women and other women who couldn't be physically present in the protest, but who maybe are the most deserving of being there because they are the most impacted by the lack of change that everyone is demanding for, is asking for. And I mean, it's very, I mean, and when we think about this, we think about refugees, but also domestic workers in Lebanon. And I think, again, this is where the feminist movement has also been a forerunner, because they're always the one bringing the kafala system into the question and reminding us that this is a problem. It's, again, the women, the Lebanese women, who talk about the domestic workers. But I think there has been, on the issue of refugees, of Syrian and Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, who at first attempted to participate, right? But they were discouraged for a number of reasons. So I think at the beginning, they were welcomed in the protests. But I think there was some part maybe that dreaded to come again, because they were always asked some kind of question of like, what is really your business here? Or maybe that's not really your protest, or things like this. But even here, there's, I think, many shades to the debates. There's, I think, for one part, there's just plain xenophobia, right? So just the most radical sections of society not wanting non-Lebanese taking part in the protest, and just wanting the revolution to be only about Lebanese, right? And this is where I think that we are risking the perversion of the argument of the one flag, because when we came up with this argument, we came up to counteract other partisan flags, so political parties. It wasn't about other national flags, and it is a common thing across protests around the world to wave flags that symbolize revolution, and the Palestinian one is one that symbolizes revolution, whether we like it or not. So it has nothing to do with violating the one flag argument. But that's one part. But in there's been a more subtle kind of debate here. There's been, because obviously not everyone is xenophobic, and a lot of people were welcoming Syrian and Palestinian refugees who wanted to be part of the protests. There was something about what was being termed the right time to make refugees a part of the Lebanese revolution. And I think this, I mean, I've never been on the ground, so all of this is kind of echo, comes to me from echoes of discussions I've heard. So what we're saying to these refugees is that it's not the time right now for you to come to those protests, because it might deter other people to come, and it might create divisions within our movements, right? And so this in return created kind of a self-censorship among those refugee communities who want to be part of this protest. And I think there was also another worry, and this is also the case for domestic workers who might want to be part of the revolution or the protest, but there are maybe their fear some kind of reprisal, right? Because they have legal status that depend on government regulation. And it's the same case for refugees who have legal status in Lebanon. If they take part and authorities know, they fear kind of what could happen. So there's also other kinds of practical limitation to their participation. I don't know if it's the case in Iraq or if there's, yeah.
You know, the transnational intersectional platform we're talking about is extremely similar, and it's also extremely important. As most of the Syrian refugees and also most of the displaced people are outside the federal Iraq, and they're more, you know, more within the autonomous Kurdish region. We did not really have, you know, the refugee intersectionalities. But then on the other hand, you know, to just emphasize on how transnational and intersectional activism is extremely important. Halim organization, the Lebanese queer organization, which started in 2003 with, you know, campaigns against the U.S.-led coalition that was targeting Iraq, is actually one of the biggest forms of, you know, transnational activism. Even, you know, the concept of pride itself, and you know, the concept of intersectionality, as Kimberly Krishna puts it, is how those pride spaces were mostly about people who nowadays can no longer be, you know, be represented within pride. And it's this, you know, the concept of transnational and intersectional activism tackles a lot more those causes. So it doesn't make sense that we just abandon them now. And I think, you know, with further development of the revolutions and with further political reading and awareness and education, we're going to reach that kind of concept and, you know, that kind of analysis and understanding of how important, you know, that kind of, not just, you know, solidarity, but existence. Because by the end of the day, it's us versus one other, not us versus multiple other, and there is no hierarchy in pain, and we're all more or less affected by, you know, by the same neoliberal systems that are oppressing all of us, maybe on different levels, but all of us in general. I'm sorry if I'm crossing over the time.
No, thank you guys. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to cut you because obviously it was quite like an essential topic. But obviously, yeah, I'm conscious of time. So I guess we can jump into like the last section and make it short. But Lilav, you were talking about the big other, the government. So the last section we wanted to talk about the kind of pushback and techniques that the government was using to counter the revolution. So yeah, Jad, do you think we can squeeze a few words?
Yeah, especially if we link it to what you were just saying, that the revolution has brought these topics forward a little bit to some extent, and how potentially the timing of the revolution, and then with Corona and the revolution's kind of losing a bit of steam, how the fact that these platforms were created beforehand has helped everyone, including the most vulnerable, to sort of to make it through this period, which is now a lot tougher for them for several reasons, including a hard pushback by the government.
Yeah, I think, I mean, counter-revolution is something that appeared, of course, before COVID, but I think, yeah, COVID kind of made it worse because we're all on lockdown. And I think this is where, yeah, social media platforms this is where this was the time where we curled even more into those digital spaces. And I can only think, for instance, I mean, this is not a counter-revolution, but it's an example on how COVID made us use in innovative ways our online platforms. For instance, sexual harassment in Lebanon, which is also a topic that was amplified by the Thawra. So, for instance, because of those platforms, we followed very closely the case of Marwan Habib, who became kind of a number one public enemy in Lebanon, because we on those platforms we shared proofs of his harassment, and we kind of followed on illegal the legal possibilities of this case, and so what happened is that we used those platforms that were created during the uprisings to shed a light on those issues. So, for instance, during the lockdown, we followed the campaign by Kattar and Abad and all of these organizations that work for women's rights, and who, for instance, encourage the spreads and the sharing of the hotline, the number of their hotlines through innovative way. So, for instance, we shared it through amusing videos that indirectly gave the number in a secret way, right? So that the victim could actually know about the number without her abuser seeing the actual number, or sharing the number through our balconies. It could be available to anyone who looks out of the window. So kind of innovative way of going around the lockdown. But I think webinars are kind of the new ways we try to keep this conversation going now that the protest has been interrupted by COVID. I think, webinars, we have seen a surge in webinars recently to talk about revolutionary topics. So we, again, finding a way to multiply those safe space where we can speak of those issues. And I think we made a good use of Zoom in recent weeks.
Exactly. I think, COVID-19 was another very big aha moment and another very big eye-opening space for us, because we've noticed an increased number of domestic violence cases, mostly against women and children. I think what started yet another extremely strong wave of feminist activism was the death of Malak al-Zubaydi, which was a domestic violence, I believe victim. I believe it took around a week from the incident when she was abused up until her death, and I think that that triggered a lot of attention in the Iraqi street, and in a way that nothing else has actually managed to be on the exact same level of intensity. Women took down the streets and took down virtual spaces, and we had so many webinars and educational spaces and places that were talking about proper activism and how to dismantle the patriarchy, and proper readings that were kind of put together in a way to do gender awareness, but without relying on all those sources, because we now have Zoom, and we now have we're now even more reliant on this virtual space to be one of ours. It also took it took a lot of people to go down and to start reading more about the Iraqi laws, and up to what extent those laws are sexist and are patriarchal, are misogynistic, and are gendered in a way where there is literally no way out. There were horrifying stories, and the only place they were reported was actually through social media. So that has also increased the amount of, intensity of how the whole entire power dynamics of the community was changing. And a way or another, there were pros and cons for COVID, especially since it was highly utilized by the government to even oppress further and further, whether the protesters or the working class or people who are literally feeding themselves on everyday basis. And I'm sure that's a very big intersecting point between Iraq and Lebanon, and we're seeing it manifesting nowadays. But at the same time, it also brought us closer to the reality of how this has happened now, when we actually thought the revolution was an extremely safe space, and we could almost imagine this as our second home, this utopic radical place that we all replaced with our harmful memories of the war and of those conflicts and the violence that generates off of conflict. But at the same time, we needed an even bigger push, which actually came with COVID-19 and with the lockdown, for us to open our eyes even more, and for us to think about how we're now not just going to dismantle those structures through taking down the streets, but what are we actually able to to read and to learn more about, and to start opening those conversations, especially since the number one demand of the protesters were always to to have to remove Adel Abdel Mahdi, which was the former prime minister, and now we have the fourth prime minister ever since the revolution, and I think he's most probably not staying as well, because what we now have is this societal sense of, I deserve better than this, and I'm not going to be okay with the way you're treating me, and you're not going to stick up to me just because of those political structures that allowed you to take control. And that shows you how maybe the whole entire timeline of how COVID-19 happened right after, and it was very, very unfortunate for so many families, yet there was a very progressive space for us to think and to critically engage with our everydayness in a way that we did not really get to do in so long.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop you now, guys. But sorry, Jad.
Before moving to Q&A, which we will in a second,
Go on.
I was wondering if Chloe, you could just very quickly set the scene on another thread that we're seeing, just because a lot of the questions actually relate to that, so we can probably expand in the Q&A. But just another threat that is probably in Iraq as well, but in Lebanon definitely the sort of the threat of the street becoming divided again. And so there's questions about that, but maybe we can set the scene very briefly on that.
So we're talking about counter-revolution attempts before and after COVID, because they're the same. And I think in Lebanon, there are different ways this happens. So of course, there's I would say direct kind of counter-revolutionary attempts at the hand of security apparatuses, whether the Lebanese army or the Guardian of Majlis or the internal security forces, just like using excessive violence on protesters and violating basic human rights. And we've seen this with use of tear gas and water cannons and firing rubber bullets and even live ammunition sometimes, and which claimed the life of Fawaz al-Sam'an in Tripoli a few months ago. But I think, as Jad said, the one that's a bit more kind of frightening on the long run is the kind of counter-revolutionary attempt, I would say, or tricks that some political parties or partisan groups play, kind of. And I think these groups, they first started by using direct violence. So in the beginning of the Thawra, there were anti-revolutionary social groups who were followers of Hezbollah or Amal, who attacked directly protesters, whether in Sur or in Beirut, they were burning their tents, having aggressive behavior towards them, vandalizing Thawra spaces, etc. But this didn't work because it rallied the whole nation against them. So the other trick right now has been to kind of polarize the streets and politicize all of these protests. So there are specific, for instance, specific individuals that take it to the streets and chant, for instance, Shia, Shia, which is a sectarian identity. And by doing so, they kind of polarize opinions, and they create in collective opinions even more divisions along sectarian lines, because when they do this, they kind of marginalize one community of Lebanese, but it's actually not the case. So in recent months, because of COVID and because we didn't have numerous or large groups of people taking it to the streets, it was easier for those like splinter group to come and kind of hijack smaller protests, right, and deviate the goal of them, and we've seen this also online digitally. So I mean, counter-revolution is not only just hijacking a protest or creating fawda, as we say. It's also about kind of the digital war, or the war of opinion, spreading rumors about war, spreading rumors about fitna, about sectarian conflict, attacking activists online, trying to report or block their accounts. So it's a whole strategy which is designed on keeping groups and organization apart, right? Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. So yeah, thanks for this, very fluid and very sort of conversation that explored lots of different themes. I think the questions are a bit more sort of focused on the direction of the last topic, which works well. So I'm gonna, there's a lot, and some of them are quite deep. So we'll do our best to go through them all, and if there's any left unanswered, we can potentially answer it offline. So I think just to stay on this topic, there's a couple questions. One of them is, as we didn't talk much about repression and counter-revolution, how do you see the future of these uprisings, especially in places where they faced severe militarized and violent repression, whether by armed militias such as Hezbollah or others? What should the next steps be in order to create positive change without spiraling down a violent path towards an armed conflict? That's a chunky one. From Bulletin Djukarovskovic.
Well, I mean, I don't think we can really see or predict the future of these uprisings. I think what we can just learn from what happened in recent months is that, for sure, the first phase of like really widespread excitement is not here anymore. So now what we have is mainly target protests happening all over the country, which exactly make it easier for repression and counter-revolution to happen. So I think it's just about how the Thawra is gonna, what the Thawra is gonna be right now. Is it only gonna be political reactiveness? Is it only gonna be target protest? Is it going to be transformed into a political kind of movement that's more organized, that's able to counterattack? Well, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. And I mean, I've been following the events kind of on a daily basis, and I think I've kind of developed a flair about how all of this is evolving, but actually not, because it depends on so many factors and on so many key players. And I think that the COVID thing kind of really put a halt on all of this. So maybe waiting for the COVID thing to calm down to see if those protests can reignite again in a kind of a wider scale. I think many people count on this. So this is a really hard question to answer, and there's no one method. And if we had this method, we would have implemented it, and we would have faced Hezbollah or all of the splinters. That they are none. And it's hard to say what the next step are, because it depends on the groups willing to organize on the ground.
Yeah. Do you have anything to, I guess this translates as well to Iraq, so I don't know if you have anything to add on top of that.
Side note, actually, because I'm aware of the timing, but in regards to the Hezbollah, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of what has happened recently, but Mustafa al-Kadhimi is the current prime minister, and the Iraqi forces raid powerful Iran, the Iranian-backed Kattar Hezbollah militias that are based in Baghdad. And then on June 26th, the Tahrir Square was packed with protesters waving the Iraqi flag, celebrating the raid by the Iraqi counterterrorism forces against the headquarters of Kattar Hezbollah in southern Baghdad. So, very recently, the latest wave of protesting was in solidarity and in support of, more or less the same concept. So I think that shows you even more how transnational, our goals are. And yeah, I'll stop here.
Okay, thanks. Just for a bit of variety, there's a hand raised in the audience. So we've got Bahut Hani. I think you're going to be unmuted.
Yes, thank you. I just discovered that Chloe's PhD is about the intellectual movement in the civil war in Lebanon, and something that we forget is that Iraq was in the 60s or the 70s one of the most educated societies in the Middle East, even better than Lebanon. I mean, there were lots of intellectual. There was an intellectual class in Iraq, and the people were mostly educated in schools. I mean, so I want to ask Chloe and Lilav too, where is the intellectual movement actually in the revolutions? I mean, in Iraq and in Lebanon, who are the intellectuals of the revolution? I understood that for Chloe, maybe it's the graphic art designers actually who can be, a part of an intellectual movement. But I wanted to know just if there are any intellectual movement guiding the revolution actually in Iraq and in Lebanon. Thank you.
You want to speak, Lilav, first?
No, Chloe, you go first.
Well, I think this question is kind of generic because there's no one intellectual movement. So for instance, in the Civil War, in my actual PhD, what I look at is different groups of intellectual, because again, it raises the huge question of who is an intellectual. So it depends. There are different definitions for this. So when I talked about the designer and illustrator of Lebanon, I meant that, of course, they shape the revolution and they give it its icons and its symbols, and in those symbols and illustration they put the collective ideas we have. But I'm not sure we can identify intellectuals of the revolution. I think it's a broader movement, and I'd rather speak of zeitgeist, of kind of central themes that are at the core of the movement, which is non-sectarianism, which is change, which is anti-corruption. I think I think we should be looking for those themes that act as core or attractive cores, a kind of course of the movement, because intellectual itself is a category that's so polemic and it has so many definitions. Are these only philosophers, or are these the educators, or are these the media people, the one who spread the ideas? It's a whole structure. And I think if the whole structure is already convinced by those key concepts that make up a kind of intellectual movement, then, and which has already happened in Lebanon. It means that we're kind of on the way of changing mentalities and of bringing new teams to the forefront. But I don't think we can identify specific intellectual. It's a way too vague a concept.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Bahutani, for you know, and I completely understand where you're coming from. And I think you know, in regards to what Chloe and I were discussing, is how this is kind of a different space, and how social media has really tackled and is entitled for most of the work that is generated and that is done through the Thawra. You know, we did have, in terms of, you know, intellectual writing, for example, and, you know, like the production of materials that are written, we did have Jarida Tahrir, which actually was being produced on daily basis down the street. So we had a newspaper, and I believe there were a couple of diasporic activists who translated it to also English. So maybe I can link one or two of the issues. So I would say all those, you know, all those young protesters who actually, you know, wrote within the panels of that newspaper to be, you know, intellectual thinkers and like intellectual revolts. Also, you know, you know, the identity and the way that social media and visualization has changed the way we deal with the Thawra is itself very, very intellectual. So I completely agree with what Chloe said. It's kind of generic, and I don't think it's fair or it's even correct to call one specific type of activism to be intellectual and you know, the other one to be more like diverse or more creative. And I believe that with further, you know, with further time and with further political awareness and political reading, which is, you know, from my personal perspective, it might be kind of obvious now. I believe it's one of the most effective forms of, you know, of activism. I think we will reach to more or less, you know, a utopic space of intellectual activism that represents what we had back in the day. But for now, especially with the amount of aggression and violence that, you know, at least the Iraqi protesters have faced, and with the very high number of deaths and kidnapping, it was not really possible to imagine such an intensity within the creation of an intellectual movement. But I definitely see it coming.
Okay, thank you. So back to written questions, there's a lot. There's two that kind of go in the same direction. So for the sake of time, I'll sort of ask them together. So one of them is, with the situation getting worse in Lebanon now, how is fatigue combated and how do people keep up the momentum? And I think it ties in, this question was from Anthony Keane, and it ties in with Mark Assaf's question, which is, revolutions are born out of injustice, misery, corruption, and certainly is ours. Although the status remains the same in the newly formed Ihsan government, Ihsan Diab, why have people become insensitive to these matters? Have we integrated these aspects into the Lebanese culture and normalized it due to these 30 long years of unchanged political class?
Sorry, I'm not sure what is the question exactly.
In a nutshell, the second one is, why have people become insensitive to the matters that we're protesting against? And the other one is sort of looking at it from an angle with the situation getting worse. How is fatigue combated, and how do we keep up the momentum?
Well, I think fatigue is a real thing, activist fatigue and just protester fatigue. It's an overwhelming thing. It's not an easy thing at all. And how much we try to push people and encourage people to take it to the street, it's kind of hard to do it when everything kinds of work against you, and that economic hardship falls upon you, and that there's like, I think there's another thing that Thawra pages have been also shedding a light on, the weight of mental health issues in Lebanon. They are way more spread than we would like to think. And I think there was also discussion on this in the early Thawra on how to manage to sustain protesting activities while dealing with mental health issues and just overall disillusionment with what's happening. And I think, I mean, I don't know how we can keep, I can't believe that such a wide population is just genuinely indifferent to those topics. I genuinely think that they're all very upset about it. But as we said, fatigue from all kinds of origins, they have impact on our ability to protest. And it's a very serious thing. And I don't think there's anything that I could say or anyone could say that could explain how hard it is to, I mean, I have family in Lebanon who are completely for the Thawra, but because of their personal circumstances and the daily complexity of what it has become to live in Lebanon, they can't always be on the streets, and I can't blame them for this. I kind of understand. So I'm not sure how we can fight fatigue. I'm sorry, I don't have a more optimist answer. And I think what we could do is just keep on going. I think if we succeed in doing so and just do whatever we usually do, I think it's gonna pay somehow. Yeah, and when the circumstances that create momentum are going to be reunited again, like they were in October 2019.
J'ai vu, comment il s'appelle, Monty, à Jarry. Il me dit son fils, le petit là, il était sorti de prison.
Who's that?
That's Mahmoud. Okay, Stian is remuted now. Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to add one thing to Chloe's thing. Is I think we need victories, even small, to kind of see the light. And it has been a little while since there's been a significant. I think most of the news recently have been bad, so I think that's definitely an element that plays too.
Yeah, I think with the fatigue thing, it's also a matter of like knowing when to stop. Actually, like to stop for a small period of time to keep going for longer, if that makes sense. I think with the whole social media thing, it's very easy to get a lot of fatigue attached to that as well, because it's like you can't rest from something when you're constantly thinking about it, as well as when you're constantly on the streets. Obviously, it's easy for me to talk here, but yeah, I mean, like distraction and pleasure comes in like equal ways of like self-care than like thinking about the long-term stuff, and distraction from social media, I think, as well. But yeah, I don't have the answer either.
Can I go? I'll
Yeah.
try to make it, within the 1 minute frame.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, the fact that we have kind of desensitized from the topics that we're standing and we're protesting for, it just comes from, the fact that our baseline of needs was not ever met for as long as we can remember. And it's completely normal that, it's completely psychologically normal that we reach to such to such a state. And I think it's it's only fair and it's only valid that conflict and violence can generate such consequences. In terms of the activism causing this fatigue feeling, and how it's also very very validated for those who are taking down the streets and who are doing the everydayness of the revolution, in comparison with us, the kind of more privileged ones who are reading and observing from far away because of our because of our circumstances. But I know that a couple of Iraqi activists kind of developed a little manual to combat fatigue, and if I find it, I'm gonna share it. It is in Arabic, And I also think, on the long run, political reading, again, political reading and just, understanding how other communities, even within, the Iraqi society itself, dealt with activism, and how long and how, progressive and how energy draining and mentally straining it is for you to go through, to live through a revolution, and to see the impacts of it until you reach, more or less the end goal. We will know, it's not something that is going to happen like this. It's not something that we'll work on for like a couple of months and then get to experience and enjoy the fruits of. It will definitely take some time, and I think the time it's taking itself is as big of a learning space as the revolution.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we underestimate how long a process this is, how a long-term process this is, really. Yeah.
I think everyone said it at the beginning, but didn't fully appreciate what it meant, and now we're truly understanding. Okay, going back to the raised hands, someone's had their hands raised for a while. Farah Khaddar, I think, Diana, if you could unmute. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm a Lebanese living in Chile, so I was very interested to hear from your Chilean speaker. Unfortunately, she didn't show up. Looks like it.
I don't know if you missed the beginning, but she dropped out last minute because of a personal thing. So she was
telling
very
my
much
husband, I hope that's not a Chilean. Yeah, I hope that's not a. My husband is Chilean, and we were making fun that Chileans tend to do that sometimes. Yes, I was here when everything started in Lebanon, and I remember sending pictures to my mom with the cacerolazo that was happening here in the streets, and she was like, is that in Lebanon? I was like, Mom, no, it's happening as well here. So I've been like kind of living the events of Lebanon in Chile, which has been pretty weird and impressive at the same time. But I wanted to ask you guys, I mean, I'm just like an idea of what do you guys think about I mean, since we're talking about similarities and differences, what Chileans managed to reach as a solution or as a beginning of a solution to this was the Asamblea Constituyente and doing a referendum, trying to see what would people vote for. And I mean, the idea is hopefully everyone would vote yes, and then we can change the constitution. But I was wondering how come that was never something on the table in Lebanon, or it was never discussed. I never heard people talk about it. And if we want to change the system from its roots, wouldn't that be like an interesting point to start with?
Well, I mean, in Lebanon, what we've talked about is not a referendum, it's the early elections. This was the kind of tool that everyone was talking about to implement. I mean, in a short-term kind of, in a short notice kind of time scale, some kind of change. I'm not sure, actually, that in Lebanon you would be able to implement a referendum in the French way, or in the case of Chile, how it works. I'm not sure if it's possible, to be fair. And I also don't know much about the Chilean, I mean, experience and how it happens. But the equivalent in Lebanon was the early election. There's been so much debate about this and about how to get there. And if in fact it was a smart or non-smart method, because we were not sure to what extent Thawra discourse and Thawra opinion were really anchored in the broad population, and we weren't sure if the kind of fresh momentum would be enough to make sure that the election would bring a kind of a new, new faces, fresh faces. So there's a huge debate on this, and there's a huge, I would say, conflict. And I mean, lots of people don't think that early election are the answer. Lots of people think they are. And to be fair, myself, I'm not really sure that, again, that early election would bring this change we want to see. because the most recent experience we had was trying to implement change through elections, was the Beirut Madinati experience some years ago. And it didn't quite give the expected results. So yeah, I think it's too early to see to what extent the Thawra has really changed mentalities in depth.
Yeah, you know, on an intersectional space as well. I mean, as I've mentioned, we've had this is our fourth or our fifth prime minister, if anyone here can correct me on the chat box. So we're not really, you know, we wanted to end, you know, the quota-based election system. We wanted to dismantle those neoliberal post 2003 implemented ways of election within this democratic government. And we're not really sure if it's going to work out or not. You know, by the end of the day, the political concepts don't take the same effect it takes in the West as it takes in the East, and it does not, you know, it does not really work on similar bases. Even, you know, what the West, you know, how the West translates what's right-winged and what's left-winged is very, very different when it comes to us, where, you know, in Lebanon and in Iraq, we had collaborations between Sadr and, you know, and the Communist Party. So there's a lot of, you know, in-depth accumulations and like, you know, a ladder of different different consequences that resulted in the kind of government that we have today. And I think, you know, the people taking down the streets are the ones who are voicing those, you know, those requirements. And if it works best, then we just have to trust them because we're working on this together. And, you know, there's no right or wrong here. And we just have to wait and see. But the social development that is accompanying that end goal is what matters the most, because that kind of intellectual sensation that the society is gaining is how we're going to then, even if the end goal, you know, governmental goal that we've reached does not match us, we're now, you know, on it enough and you know, dedicated enough for this purpose to know exactly what to do to end it as well.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions, and I think for everyone's sake, I'm going to cap it at 1:30, if that's okay with our panelists. So another sort of big dozen of minutes, and I'll go back to the Q&A. I think the top question is not something that we mentioned, but I think might be interested to hear maybe the different diaspora experiences from Lebanon and Iraq. It's a long question, but I think the essence is quite simple. As a diaspora, there are many of us waiting to be active and contribute constructively with our people back home and within the region. For me, being Lebanese, yeah, Lebanon. However, we all know the division of our community abroad as well, which further perpetuates the corrupt realities in the region, especially. Can you suggest ways we can concretely be involved, support, and contribute from outside the region? In my case, Toronto and Canada, being a volunteer, supporting and organizing, raising, fundraising, etc. So I think there's already been a chat box answer, which is sort of, this is literally what we do at Impact Lebanon, and we sort of don't have any restrictions on what kind of ideas can be brought forward. So you can either propose or start an initiative, and you'll get our full support, basically, and our community. But I think, yeah, I think very briefly, I don't know if there's any notable diaspora perspectives or knowledge we can hear from Chloe or Lilav. Yeah, Lilav.
Yeah, so you know, at least within the Western spaces, we saw a lot of solidarity movements almost on weekly basis. And yes, the sectarian turmoil and how it has generated into a lot of divisions between the diasporic Iraqi community. It was sometimes visible, but I think we were also brought together not just by how patriotic and how passionate we were about the cause, but also how saddened we actually were about this extreme violence and the number of the assassinations and the kidnapping and I think it brought pain sometimes brings people together in a way that is not necessarily explained through the Western political lens. In London, there are many, many initiatives. I know in Germany there are many initiatives as well. But at least the one platform that I found myself the most active throughout was Cafi Iraq, CAFI. I can also link their Instagram and their Twitter, and they are in need of volunteers. So anyone, whether we were looking for people to help with designing or people to help with politically organizing throughout, the rest of the world, we would be more than happy to have them. So I can also send you that link, and then we can share it with the emails.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about this because, I mean, there's been, of course, lots of talk on diaspora solidarity to consolidate and help the homeland, right? Whether in fundraising or just participating online, resharing, being present, etc. So there's always this kind of one-way kind of support. So it's the diaspora being the support system of the homeland. But actually, what could be done is a kind of diaspora on diaspora kind of work. And I think this is something important because there's already lots of things happening in Lebanon and Iraq, and people on the ground, they're amazing organizers. They come up with initiative and they're doing the work. It's just that the obstacles are huge, but they're doing the work. How about raising awareness in our in the communities of our diasporas? And it could be because as the question raised very, very rightly, is that sometimes these realities that come from the homeland, they are perpetrated in the communities, right? So for example, it could be sectarian identities among Lebanese communities in Canada or in France, which are perpetrated from generations to generation. How about creating something, anything, an awareness campaign to actually raise this in diaspora, in the diaspora, right? So, think of the ways in which the diaspora can work on itself better than always thinking of how to help at home. I think this could help us also in return.
This is definitely a good point, and something that has a lot of other perspectives have come to life and initiatives, but this particular one has not really come to life yet. So it's definitely a good idea. I think we have time for a couple other questions. There's another hand raised. So if we could go to Milutin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for this amazing discussion, very much needed. And don't let my name fool you, Anna. I'm Lebanese, born and raised in Lebanon, just studying abroad. But I have this question because I'm doing my master's basically about revolutions and contentious politics and the Arab uprising since 2011. And you can see, like in Tunisia, for example, after the youth started the uprising, when the elections came, it was mostly Hizb al-Nahda, for example, and these old political elites who capitalized on these revolutions, right? So also, as you said, Chloe, in Lebanon, it's easier to polarize people, especially now because you have less people on the streets and all of that. And I just wanted to ask, like, how important is the political organization of our movements? Because, okay, first, we didn't want a clear leader who they can, you know, target or try to repress, and we wanted it to be more bottom up. But at some point, it's established that our revolution is like very real, and there is an entity, there are revolutionists working on this cause. So if the elections, for example, the early elections come, the old political parties are gonna capitalize again, just as in the Beirut Madinati case, you have the Hariri and the Mustaqbal also capitalized again. So don't you think it's time for all these civil society organizations and all these activists to unite in order to not let the fatigue settle in and for the momentum, you know, to lose its power or whatever, and for all these efforts, you know, not to go to waste once the elections come, actually?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it's been on the lips of everyone. It's this thing about, okay, we took it to the street, we broke banks and we broke forefronts and stuff, and now it's the time of organization. So I think there's a kind of trap in this argument about organization, because the Lebanese political and social landscape is not the same one as in Tunisia or even in Sudan, where this was kind of the way they did to kind of follow up on their protests. The problem in Lebanon is that we don't have really these experience of alternative political organization. So we have al-Mujtama al-Madani, which has been active on the scene for some years now. And eventually maybe a coalition of Mujtama al-Madani could break the ranks of the election somehow. But I just still don't think that that's enough, because they've been trying this in the last years and the results were very minimal, because as you said, traditional parties are so embedded in societies. I mean, not in tribal ways, but they have mechanism. They are used to campaigning. They have networks that's been there for years. They can very easily capitalize on those once the elections are here. So I don't even think organizing is the key right now. And I don't even think we're there yet. I think first of all is raising awareness and keep continuing raising awareness, because we think because we're young and we're westernized and we've studied that this is a given, but it's what we've done in the last 8 months is not even enough. We need to raise more awareness on everything that's wrong and how it works and how corruption, all of these things, how it perpetrates, because people are not aware of how it works. They say corruption and nizam. Okay, but how does it work? How does it perpetuate? I think first of all, there needs to be lots of awareness campaigns before even thinking about organizing, because if we organize but we don't have the audience ready, then that's even more harmful.
Yes, I understand, but again, if like for me at least, I feel like if the elections take place and then we lose, like we have a, you know, very big loss, then the awareness, although it's very much necessary, and of course, you have a history, the memory of the civil war is still here, you know, like you cannot shake that, and to shake that, you require a lot of effort. But if you lose, then you would lose momentum again. Then this awareness, like, but yeah, I get what you mean. They should both come together, but we cannot, you know, ignore any aspect of it. But it's a long road, as you posted recently as well on your Instagram page. It's
it's a very long road. I agree that there should be organizing. I agree that those groups and organisms that are already on the ground and they have identity and that have kind of a small number of followers, they should keep going and they should keep organizing and they should unite and create coalitions so we can have alternative parties to choose from. I just think there still needs to be a way deeper, a more huge awareness campaign at the level of the country. I mean, I don't even know how this is possible, but I mean, this is where we are at right now. We are at the beginning, at the very beginning, and sometimes the focus on organizing and on election, we kind of miss the point of how how at the beginning we are, how all of this movement is an embryonic, it's nothing, it's still like a small thing that should keep on expanding.
Yeah, for sure. The thing is, like in contentious politics, you always have to construct a frame for your movement and social movement. And what's really hard in our countries, and especially Lebanon, is that you need to, build this whole new frame away from sectarianism and away from all the other frames about March 14 or March 8th and any other mobilization that happened. And you need, a long time to do that. But I think, we're on the right path, and with awareness, and you need to make the frame clear. You need to, switch it more to a left-right debate. It's neoliberal policies who kill all usas, they are the basis of corruption. And to add to that, sectarianism and all of that. But yes, I agree with you. Inshallah khair, and thank you again.
Can I please go? Yeah, so this completely adds to the fact of what we spoke about earlier, and how every single revolution is very, very case specific, and how reading and organizing and academia can be very resourceful and can educate us enough, but then just like Chloe mentioned, we require a lot longer and a lot further amounts and efforts of awareness, because by the end of the day it's a societal revolution, and it's not supposed to be led by the 1%. And many many of the protesters who are leading down the streets, they could be influenced positively and beautifully by by the westernization and by the concept of the left and the right, and having a platform, but that still needs to be transferred to other generations that have been affected by former and other chains of of conflict and war zones and economical crisis, and the whole entire mobilization scene is very different. So we need to build a space that's collaborative enough for everyone before we get to invest further and decide how are we going to lead this, because by the end of the day it should be led by everyone, and our educational differences and our ability to access certain resources does not make us more entitled of how the revolution is programmed. By the end of the day, it's for everyone, and it will take us a long time to reach there. When so many revolutions around the world started, they already had some form of an educational platform and an infrastructure that was backing that up, and we're still lacking on those. So it's amazing how we can just further imagine standing in solidarity and supporting the movement and the momentum while we reach that place when we're all kind of capable enough of imagining potentiality and futurity in such a way.
Thank you. That's, I mean, yeah, we're fighting against our divisions, and that's a very big part of it. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it here, because there's, and understandably, so many questions.
I think one question, one hand raised.
Okay, fine. Okay, hand raised, but let's, yeah, Yusuf. Yusuf?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah, hope you're doing well. Thank you for having me. I have one question that I have asked a lot of activists, whether the Iraqi protest, uprising, or revolution, based on what you are naming it, did it succeed or failed, and why? How you see it? And the same question goes for the Lebanese movement.
Shukran, Yusuf. Thank you for being here. And I think from everything we've said, everything everyone else has mentioned, and from all the other beautiful activists, creating activism through different, through different places, including you yourself. I think we're already seeing multiple rewards from the revolution, and I think success is not, black and white, and especially within those kind of momentum requiring spaces, we need the consistency for us to be able to imagine how are we able to picture success, because by the end of the day, what is success, and how how far have we reached since October until now? A lot of blood was shed, so many souls were lost, and we have also encountered this sense of questioning, and this sense of you know of not taking a no for a no and a yes for a yes, and that itself is an extremely important and a very big success factor that I think should be appreciated as a little baby step of success, uh, and therefore for us to use it to dismantle this big thing that we're trying to dismantle, and to reach the goal that we're then planning and organizing to reach.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the question was more about how we see, how we can assess the achievements right now. I'm not sure if this was the question, but I mean, to me, I mean, personally, I think, I know it sounds weird to say, but I think we already won. We already won kind of the long-term battle, because practically, I mean, it might look like we're losing, but if we look at the discourse, if we engage in debate, there's absolutely no way that we're going to lose, because, I mean, that's, I'm having a bit of difficulty to really voice my opinion. I'm just saying that we've started the process of winning, and that's for sure. It's just a very long process, and it doesn't look like it practically. But now in Lebanon, if you engage with anyone who is still a partisan, I mean, you can very well imagine how the conversation will end. They absolutely have no counter arguments whatsoever to offer to the table. So this means that we have won, at least theoretically.
I thought the previous answers was a good place to end, but I think this is the best place to end on these victorious words from Lilav and Chloe. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But no, yeah, I think we all need a bit of hope, a bit of to hear things like this, especially this week or this month has been nothing rough for a lot of people. So I apologize for everyone who's got a question pending. We just there's so much to talk about, and unfortunately we're not able to cover it all. But I've written down all the questions, and hopefully, yeah, we'll attempt to get back to you offline potentially. And so thanks everyone for joining. We'll be sending a follow-up email to this panel with the resources from Lilav and Chloe, and we'll also get Paula, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. We'll also ask her to send some material for those who are interested in the Chilean perspective as well. And we'll aim to include one or two causes that the panelists think are important. If people want to go check them out and potentially support them, I think it's important. And yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks especially to Lilav and Chloe. I think this chat was, yeah, this chat was amazing, and even better than I thought.
Yeah. Thanks to Impact Lebanon for being such a uplifting platform, and a platform that kind of give space to change and to interesting debate. So really thank you, and thanks to all I mean the ones who came and gave 2 hours to this. Yeah.
Thank you for organizing, and thank you for contributing, and we're in the fight together, and it's so blessing to be able to imagine all those people coming, you know, and forming this space of change. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, thanks everyone, and yeah, get in touch if you want to get involved with us and find out more about what we do, or if you have any ideas, of course, feel free to speak to us. And until next time, I mean, there's a lot more where this came from. So yeah, look forward to seeing some of you in other events and in the future. And thanks, Ilya, for obviously moderating as well. Let's not forget that. Yalla. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.